Highgate Cemetery in North London has always held an air of mystery. Established in 1839, the cemetery is home to Gothic mausoleums, towering obelisks and overgrown pathways that wind through rows of crumbling graves. It's the final resting place of many famous figures, from Karl Marx to George Eliot. But in the late 1960s, Highgate Cemetery became infamous for something far darker, a vampire that allegedly haunts its grounds. The story begins in December 1969, when a young man named David Farrant, who was intrigued by the occult, decided to visit Highgate Cemetery late one evening. Farrant later reported that as he walked along the graves, he felt a sudden, overwhelming chill and saw a tall, dark figure standing near the cemetery's north gate. The figure had a terrifying presence, and he described its face as ghastly, with intense eyes that seemed to stare directly at him. Before he could react, the figure vanished into the darkness. Tarrant left in a state of shock, convinced he had encountered something supernatural. Soon after, other reports began to surface. Several locals claimed they too had seen a dark, ghostly figure with piercing eyes near the cemetery. Some even claimed to feel a sense of paralysis or dread whenever they approached the area after dark. In early 1970, a wave of hysteria spread through the community. Witnesses reported that animals, mainly foxes, were found dead in the area around the cemetery, their bodies drained of blood. The rumours grew, and whispers about a vampire began circulating among the press and the public. As interest and fear grew, the story took on a life of its own. Local newspapers picked it up, describing the sightings and building the legend of the Highgate Vampire. In March 1970, the media frenzy reached its peak when David Farrant wrote a letter to a local newspaper, claiming he had seen the entity again and was planning to investigate it further. He was determined to confront the vampire and discover the truth. Meanwhile, another man named Sean Manchester, a self-proclaimed vampire hunter and rival of Farrant's, entered the scene. Manchester claimed that the Highgate Vampire was a 15th century Romanian noble who had practiced black magic and had been brought to England in a coffin. According to Manchester, the vampire had been buried in what would later become Highgate Cemetery, where it had been awakened by dark rituals carried out in the cemetery's old mausoleums. The rivalry between Manchester and Farrant became public, and both men planned their own hunts for the vampire. Tensions rose when Manchester announced he would perform an exorcism at the cemetery to rid of the creature. Crowds began gathering outside Highgate, curious and fearful, waiting to see what might happen. On Friday, March 13th, 1970, hundreds of people showed up, hoping to catch a glimpse of the vampire. Some even scaled the cemetery gates after dark, hoping to see the legendary creature for themselves. Over the next few months, Farrant and Manchester each made claims of attempts to track and eliminate the Highgate Vampire. Farrant was later arrested for allegedly trespassing in the cemetery, and Manchester claimed he had finally staked the vampire in a private ceremony. No solid evidence was ever produced to prove the existence of a vampire in Highgate, yet the legend lived on, fueled by each new twist in the rivalry between the two men. In the years following, paranormal enthusiasts, tourists, and curious locals flocked to Highgate Cemetery, each hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous vampire. Some reported strange experiences like feeling a sense of unease, hearing whispered voices, or seeing shadowy figures moving between the graves. Though time has passed, the tale of the Highgate Vampire endures, a legend forever woven into the history of Highgate Cemetery. Some insist the sightings were exaggerated, a mix of hysteria, and the rivalry turned sensationalized spectacle, yet others maintain that something supernatural lingered among the graves of Highgate, something that prowled the grounds at night, feeding on fear. Highgate remains one of London's most haunted places, and whether the vampire legend is real or not, there are still those that believe that on certain nights a malevolent spirit may still be found roaming on its shadowy paths.